Okay, we're joined with David Beer here to talk about his work on the data gaze and his broader work on things like algorithms and data. So thanks for joining us, Dave.
Pleasure. Thanks, Steve.
If you want to know more about Dave's work, there's a bit of a synopsis here and some links. But Dave, can you tell us a little bit about your work over the years?
Yes, so I'm based in the Department of Sociology at the University of York. Quite a lot of what I've done is quite interdisciplinary. Um, I think probably the main things I've focused on over the last sort of probably, well, best part of 20 years really is the sort of the social implications of data and the expansion of data analytics and the role of algorithms in the social world as well. So a lot of the work's tried to think about, particularly I've thought about it in terms of data circulations and the politics of data circulations. So it's sort of how data is extracted, but then how it folds back into our lives, into everyday lives, reshaping us and the choices we make and the choices made about us.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I first became familiar with your work about your book, Punk Sociology, which is quite a while
All
ago.
right.
Yeah, yeah. And also say, I just noticed that maybe this is the first time that the photo that I've used for the person, you're actually seem
Yeah.
to be wearing the shirt.
I was going to comment on that, Steve. I am wearing the same shirt that you've got in there. That's just to ensure you've got a nice, neat
That's
branding
good, yeah. It's not like some kind of recursive data feedback loop. It's actually
in your
real. Like,
slides.
yeah, yeah.
An old favorite, you know.
So, like,
Yeah,
yeah, we're mostly here to talk about your work on the data gaze, which is quite influential on the course overall, and it keeps coming up throughout. So, can you
great.
tell us a little bit about how what that concept is and what it's meaningful for, and how it helps us understand our kind of current situation?
Yeah, so I came to this I'd around about 2012, 2013. I did a book on called Popular Culture and New Media, The Politics of Circulation, which was about data circulations in culture. Um, And then I followed that with a book on called Metric Power, which was an attempt to think about the role of data circulations in power. So I'd got the two books on one on culture, data circulation culture, one on data circulation and power and the politics elements. And then I thought I'd make a kind of what I borrowed the term from William Mitchell, a kind of loose trilogy, is that this one then is about the mediation of data circulation. So
Mhm.
it's it works alongside those. So what I was interested in doing really was trying to understand, in the first instance, I wanted to try to understand the data analytics industry that was emerging at the time. So as you got an expansion of data being accumulating about people, I wanted to try to see, well, how are those data mediated? And how are they analyzed in order to then become part of the social world? So there's that kind of process of mediation a bit really around data that I was interested in.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that really, if you're focusing on data analytics, that's where data become instantiated in our lives and where they start to have influence because they become part of decision-making processes. They become part of how judgments are made or how we see the world through visualizations or any kind of analytic kind of process that goes on, whether that's in the workplace or as part of people's kind of health practices or whether that, through to kind of consumption and leisure. Also kind of in the financial sector, as you've been working on as well, Steve. Was trying to think how those data become part of the social world through analytics. So my first kind of starting point was to think about was trying to make sense of that really.
Mm. And so you developed what like a Foucauldian notion of the gaze that's been used in a lot
Yeah.
of different ways, the medical gaze, the male gaze, there's many different kind of ways that the notion of the gaze has been used. So can you tell
Yes.
us a little bit about what the data gaze is?
Yeah. So as I was working on the data analytics ideas that I was trying to develop, and I did a sort of early version of a thing called that was looking at envisioning the data analytics industry. So how is it imagining data and how does it develop? I was also rereading Michel Foucault's The Birth of the Clinic,
Hmm.
and I started to see that these things are comparable, but not directly comparable. So there was like Foucault's analysis of the clinical space and the clinical gaze and how that's exercised. It seemed to me gave me potentially kind of a conceptual framework that I might be able to rework and work with to think about what was going on with data, because both of these are analytical spaces. That's the thing.
Yep.
So you've got the clinic, the kind of medical clinic that Foucault was looking at, is an analytic space. And what he was looking at really is the development of kind of an analytic gaze that's got a kind of expert perspective on things and that is deployed within a space designed for that gaze to operate, and in which a terminology emerges that facilitates the authentication and verification of that expert gaze over the subject.
Yep.
So then I thought, well, what I'll do is, although these things aren't the same, what I'll do is I'll explore the data gaze. So we're exposed to this view of these data analytics structures. And I thought there instantly there's something going on around the way we're looked at and seen through those data. And that it allowed me then to start to think, well, what is the difference here between the medical gaze, the clinical gaze that Foucault was talking about, and
Hmm.
the type of data gaze that I was seeing in relation to data analytics?
Yep.
And some of what I do in the book is to try to think, it allows me then to explore data gaze by thinking about how it's different to what Foucault
Yep.
found in his historical cases in relation to the data structures that I was looking at.
Yep. And if anything, since you wrote the book, like I would say that, what's developed since then, this kind of data gaze has become more important, right? It's become
Yeah.
in more and more aspects of our lives, credit agencies, rental, like medical stuff, all now is kind of
Yeah.
gathered through all this data that our data traces. Um, and yeah, do you feel a little bit like you were predicting what was happening there
I
when you
think
were
there's
doing
an
that?
element of, yeah, there's a methodological problem in this field, really, Steve, which is that these things move quite quickly often.
Yeah,
And social science uh, methods, research design, publishing, and so on, is always operating behind that. So
that's right.
it's very difficult. If you try to keep up, you're going to get yourself in a mess.
Yep.
But I've been trying to cope with that problem in different ways. And in this, what I was trying to do was get a sense of the direction that things were heading in
Mm,
as I was writing it.
yep.
So I was trying to think, well, what if I'm thinking kind of historically and conceptually, what direction does this seem to be going in? And the obvious direction at that point was an expansion of the data analytics industry
Yep.
and an increase in the nature of the reach
Mm,
of the data gaze.
mm,
And one of the things I thought about was the kind of the way that the data frontiers are being pushed back all the time to
yep.
incorporate more things into the field of vision of the data gaze.
Yep.
So that was one of the things that very change was one of the things I was trying to analyze in the text, where possible.
Yep. Yep. So you talk it throughout the book about how data relations are social relations. Can you unpack some aspects of that for us?
Yeah. I mean, I do think this is like the one of the key things facing sociological work is how the social world is reordered around data and
Mm,
around algorithmic structures of different types. So, and data relations, yeah, they're always social because the data is produced through social relations, through interaction, through activity, through socialization processes, through being part of the social world generates the data. So the data have always got this entanglement with social relations of some sort. But then the way that those data circulate back into our lives is also deeply social because it has intentionality to it sometimes, or it might be that it's reshaping the way we see ourselves, the
mm,
way we see other people, the way we see social structures. These data feed back into how organizations operate, how social ordering works. So there's lots of different ways how people are treated. So there are a vast range of ways in which these data are social. But I think seeing the social aspects of it is really important. It isn't just a technical exercise.
mm.
It's to try to think about, to really try to think in sociological terms for me, but it could be in criminological terms or any kind
Yep.
of social science terms, I think, about how data do shape the social world.
Mm.
and shape people's social lives.
Yeah. And so one of the key things you talk about is how the data gaze, it kind of metaphorically extracts and analyzes and predicts.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah. So I think the data gaze is predictive. It's diagnostic is one of the ideas I explored, continuing that medical idea in the
Yeah.
book. So it's being exercised over data, not only to see the world as it is, so the kind of the real-time analytics kind of thing that you get, but it's also predictive, it's anticipatory. So it's trying, the data gaze is constantly trying to see patterns, trends, directions
Mm.
in order. Often these data analytics companies are set up in order to allow people to make decisions before they need to be made or in anticipation of what will happen or before trends take hold or before events play out. So it's got this kind of anticipatory kind of edge to it, a predictive kind of focus. Um, and one of the promises projected onto data analytics is often that you can kind of almost like see the future. You can be quicker than others. You can, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And so the important quote that I kind of pulled out here, I think is particularly important because, there's a lot of claims about the potentiality of data, what it can do. Increasingly, we understand that, some of that's kind of over-promising or false or often just people
Yeah.
trying to sell us a particular thing or a particular ideology. But what's particularly important about the data gaze is kind of this sheen of science, isn't there, or rationality that gives
Yeah.
it a legitimacy in kinds of in
Yeah.
interesting ways, right?
Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah,
mean, de decisions made with data carry with them a kind of inbuilt verification, legitimacy, validity kind of process, a kind of truth making, kind of process
yeah,
that becomes difficult to challenge because they look objective. They seem like that that any kind of subjective element is removed.
yeah,
And therefore, a decision made through data starts to become something that people trust, even if they know it's wrong.
yeah.
There's these kind of strange relations that people have with data where it becomes a reality for people,
Mm,
even when they can sometimes see through it, I think, as well.
yeah,
They still operate within those structures of league tables or the way that it's judged. So you only have to imagine, people in a workplace where the measures can actually be detrimental to what they're trying to do,
yeah,
but they live within those data structures and operate in response to them. So they adapt their practices in relation to those things. But yeah, so when a decision is made about us or about other people, or we make a decision even, it comes with a kind of veneer of objectivity, of
mm,
of legitimacy, because it's made with data.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so this means that there's a huge new industry, right, of multi-billion, if not trillion-dollar industry around data and its
Yeah.
accumulation and its ownership, and it kind of ends up creating new forms of value, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, it does. And I think this is where one of the things that the book it was more difficult to anticipate, Steve, I think, where this would go at the time.
yep,
Because you really stuff like training data, for instance, you knew it was there and it was kind of incorporated into it, but with the scale of something like the value of like data for training
mm,
artificial intelligence, so on, that perhaps wasn't quite reflected in what I was doing at the time,
yep,
although it was kind of started. You could see that that's how they were training algorithms and so on. So it's kind of it's in there. But yeah, so types of value emerge because the value is really in what you can use the data to say and how you can then use that to anticipate behaviors or shape behaviors and
mm,
so on. So it explores some of those things in the text, I think, if I remember correctly. So we're trying to think about actually how do you get that? You've got all this massive amount of data, often unstructured, messy code. How do you turn that into value?
mm,
And in the data analytics industry, as I looked at it, there are people then that, well, the job is actually just largely to clean the data up and things like that in
yep.
order to extract value from it. And then you've got automated analytics and dashboards and so on that are there to generate value in terms of how they shape decision making.
Yeah, yeah. It's as someone that's kind of largely a qualitative sociologist, where we talk to people and observe and things like that. There's often been a critique of our work that it's too subjective, and I've always kind of
Yeah.
gone back to say, well, survey work is always cleaned up, and it's like made to look much more
Yeah.
neat than it
Yeah.
is. And like, what we have here is that kind
Yeah.
of cleaning of data and it's kind of mission creep and used in different ways, kind of writ large, through all
Yeah,
these kind of different sectors of our lives. Yeah, 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 yeah.
exactly.
Okay. Okay. So we also so we can talk about the industry. We can talk about how data is produced and encoded and extracted and all these kind of things, but it kind of then has effects on people's lives, right? Where we
Yeah,
essentially, we know about the data. We know we're under the gaze. Much sociological theory knows that when we're being observed or we're in a particular social situation, that we then perform ourselves in various ways in reaction to the norms or the expectations of that situation. So can you tell us a little bit about like how the data gaze kind of seeps into our day-to-day lives and how we perform ourselves?
yeah. Now this is where I think this is where I think it's quite complicated because there's a lot of different ways it operates, and a
Mm.
lot of different ways it finds way in. And sometimes I think we wouldn't even realize it, quite often. Um, because it might be that I mean, if you take something like credit referencing, for example, uh,
Yep.
Steve, you've got the data accumulating about credit, about people's credit worthiness. We're encouraged to look at our own credit referencing scores
Yep.
on these apps, to follow them, to then perform ourselves in a way that increases our credit worthiness within those systems by taking out loans or credit cards or whatever
Yep.
else it might be, things that increase our credit score.
Hmm.
So we're engaging in being our own data and analysts at
Yeah.
the same time within these systems. It's not just what's done to us, but then you've also got your credit score being used by different companies to decide whether or not you can rent a flat, or whether you can have a loan or a mortgage or whatever else it might be, credit
Yep.
card, but also the rates that you get those things at. So you see these things, these pressures. In some ways, we learn how to perform the self within data structures as well.
Mm.
And in response to them, we're kind of trained by these systems a little bit, I think. So because we're partly the data gaze is exercised on us, but we're also trained to have a data gaze
Yeah.
ourselves, to exercise our data gaze over the self and the data we produce and how that impacts the way we're treated and so on.
Yep. Yep.
So you've got companies exercising the data gaze and we're responding to those ordering structures, but we're also learning how to exercise it over ourselves. And that's
Mhm.
where I think the reach of the data gaze, it's not a kind of classic surveillance kind of thing where you've got, like imagine like CCTV.
Yep.
It's like it comes into and we internalize it, the data gaze, I think, as well.
Yes.
It's in the structures that we're living in, but it's also then something that we apply to the self.
Yeah, and it's interesting in terms of, media theory and stuff like that. It's like, this
Mm.
the kind of more Marxist work over the years that hypodermically we're kind of just following
Yeah,
instructions of the media or kind of being determined by
yeah,
these things. It's not that simple, is it? So we'll talk a little bit about how
no,
some of these things may be resisted. But yeah, essentially there's a kind of an emotional,
yeah,
affective state, isn't it, that like people have to deal with. And
yeah,
I think throughout the course we've kind of highlighted quite well that like it's very much dependent on, your own life, who you are, what you're interested in, and some people will pay attention to some kind of data gaze elements, and other people won't care about others. We talk to young people about like using different platforms, and some like are horrified by ChatGPT, but they're fine using Spotify, and so this different kind of
yeah,
data gazes or different experiences going on, and kind of they
yeah,
tend to choose the data gaze that they're more happy to put up with based on
yeah,
their own needs and wants and emotions and that kind of
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
But it's also having access to the resources to be able to manage the data gaze. And some people have got in a position to manage the data gaze more
Yes.
than others. And that's where you can get new types of inequality, I think, probably emerging.
Yeah, that's right.
But
And
new
we do
levels of
Bev's work on that. Yeah.
yeah, and you've got new levels of pressure that come as well with it, about how you then manage these data structures. And that's where I think the effective element comes in.
Mm.
I think with the data gaze, it's thinking about, and with the previous book, Metric Power, I kind of finished with this in the final section of that book. It's about how these data and these metrics make us feel.
Yep.
And that's very powerful because the way they make us feel then is impacts on how we then behave, and social relations and our social identities
Mm.
are impacted by it because um, like the that kind of sense, it can be a sense of anxiety that it might produce, or it might be a sense of satisfaction or of kind of, insight, or
Mm.
of belonging or community. There's all sorts of things it can produce as affects in the way that you've got on
Yeah.
the screen here.
Yeah.
I think that's almost like a kind of a bit of an unresolved question in my book, to be honest, because I think it's very difficult methodologically to get at the effective dimension of data structures,
Mm.
partly because having the methods to do it is limited,
Yeah.
but also the ability of when you're living amongst a data structure, being able to articulate what that feels like and how it shapes how you feel
Mm.
is is really difficult.
Yeah, I
So
think that's a really good point.
methods wouldn't necessarily reveal much about it.
Yeah. And methodologically, when you're doing research, you can only really kind of cut out one thing at a time, you know. So we're talking to young people about their fintech, and we might sit with
Yeah,
them, and they'll take us through a purchase or a bet or a crypto
yeah,
purchase or a. But then,
yeah,
like, you know, they're also on all these other platforms, and so there's this kind of plethora of
yeah,
different things going on that methodologically it's kind of hard to access and understand that kind of broader thing that's going on without kind of just cutting little bits out here and there that isn't really how we experience it outside of the kind of method itself. So we're kind of
it
grappling
is.
with that a little bit in our work at the moment as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that is another challenge there, isn't it?
Mm,
The way we set up social research is often with a single problem or question.
mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so I've just put this in. We don't need to talk about this one too much, but like I'm flagging
yeah,
later in the course that I'll bring this up. That like I do a week where I talk to Julia Coffey about her work with like young women in particular using selfie apps and stuff like that, and how they look at themselves almost through the data gaze
yeah,
themselves through various ratios and all that kind of stuff. So, but I do think it's important to point out that like again, there isn't this kind of hypodermic needle model that we're just kind of determined by these kind of data algorithms and that kind of stuff. We kind of we react, we perform, we take on some, we resist some others. It's but overall, much of the sociological work on this says it's kind of profoundly affecting what it means to be a human, creating new forms of subjectivities and inequalities. And this is the kind of area we're kind of reckoning with throughout the course, and much of the people like us are kind of doing in our research, right? Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
to
I think
conclude, Dave.
yeah, that's it, Steve. That question of power is definitely the one
Yeah,
that I think is
yeah.
one to lead with. Yeah.
So to conclude, I just thought I'd get you to maybe, can you sum up at the moment what do you think is most important for us to think about or consider when the data goes, or maybe where you think things are heading next?
Mm.
Put you on the spot a bit.
Yeah, you have. Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, yeah. Well, I didn't. It's only when you kind of reflect you realize it's 8 years since I did this anyway,
Yep.
Steve, and things have changed a lot. And some of the companies that I looked at have become very powerful.
Mm,
And have become very influential. But I think you clearly at the moment we're in I think we're a period of kind of quite profound uncertainty. Now, a lot of these data structures and the way they're presented is there's a very certain future in which there's data expansion of analytics, but also the expansion of artificial intelligence in a certain direction.
hmm
But at the same time, you've got profound kind of geopolitical uncertainty and
Yeah.
environmental uncertainties that underpin that as well. And I think there's a tension there
Mm,
I don't think has been explored. But you've also then got these questions around how data feed into automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, which I think have expanded what we might understand as the kind of data gaze and how it operates, but also how data are being analyzed and how data are being produced is changing as a result of that. So that I think that's probably where some of the key questions are, because we've lived amongst this for another 8 years, 9 years since I was working on this anyway, Steve. And your work, and you mentioned Julia's on the editable face and so on. These are the areas I think where we've got
mm,
specific questions emerging that are going to be really important.
Yep. Excellent. I might hold it there, Dave. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.